We are talking Las Vegas Raiders football on the Our Football Network, Our Football YouTube channel. And whenever we talk about the Raiders, we welcome in this man, Hondo Carpenter, who is now SI's NFL senior writer. How's it going there, Hondo?
Great. I'm proud to be an NFL writer on SI, and I'm and about our on SI platform, and thrilled. But I love coming on with you. I look forward to it every year, buddy. Thanks for having me again this year.
I appreciate it. And I look forward to also bothering you before the season begins. But
It's
we
never a
got,
bother. I love being on with you, brother.
I appreciate that. Okay. So a lot's happened since the last time we spoke, because the last time we talked, it was before the season. And there was quite a bit of optimism on your
Mhm.
behalf. So I want to start there because obviously a lot of content we're going to talk about here is going to be regarding the NFL draft and obviously with the Raiders and how the offseason has gone so far. And by the way, I should probably also note this is last year's NFL draft guide for our lads. The new one is going to be coming out in a few weeks. So make sure you check out the link in the description so you can get ahead and order your Our Lads 2025 NFL draft guide. But let's talk a little bit about last year. Why didn't it go as well as you thought it was going to?
Couple of reasons, and I think that's a very fair question. And one of the things I love about being on your show, I don't have any respect for writers who come out with opinions, and then when they fail, they're like, okay, but don't ask me about that. That, first of all, that insinuates that your readers are stupid and can't
Yeah,
remember. I absolutely was optimistic last year, 100%. And my prediction failed miserably. Um, and there's absolute reasons why. And I'm going to get into that. So I appreciate you holding me accountable, because I think it being held accountable, I believe, makes you a more respected journalist than pretending like your predictions never stood up.
100%.
I'm going to tell you a couple of things. Number one, the discipline and focus of the last half of 2023 that got Antonio Pierce the job did not translate into 2024. There were uh, there was a lot of um, I'm trying to choose my words really carefully here, Greg, because but let's just say that the discipline of 2023. Let me give you just one example, and there are many, but I'll give you one. The Raiders were under Antonio Pierce in 2023, were the least penalized team in the NFL. They
Okay.
had multiple games of no penalties. But in 2024, they looked like the Raiders of old. The discipline was not there. Now, you can point a lot of fingers in a lot of different places and guess why that was the case. And I believe I have a very good reason why, or a very good understanding of why. But the point that really matters is it's the truth. They were not disciplined. And maybe it was the last part of 2023, there was a sense of urgency. We want to get AP the job. I want to get the job, whatever. But in 2024, there was the mistake of Luke Getsy, which was a terrible hire for the Raiders, in my opinion, an absolute terrible hire, in my opinion. I think that Antonio Pierce in 2023 followed his gut. And I think in 2024, he followed more conventional wisdom than his gut. And I believe he would tell you that, by the way. I don't believe I'm talking poorly about him at all. I think he's a great man. Um, and I think that hurt him. So I say a combination of a lot of things. It was an utter collapse. And it was disappointing to watch because I don't root against people.
Sure.
I'm not a fan, but I root for good people, and there was a lot of good people that had really bad years last year. I think Mark Davis made the right decision. And that's hard for me to say because I have so much personal respect for AP.
Yeah.
And I think AP can be a very good coach in the NFL. But I think, like Bill Belichick, and I'm not calling him Bill,
Sure.
but I'm using Bill as an example. There's a lot of guys who fail their first time and
Yep.
learn. I think AP learned some really good lessons. I think he learned if my head's on the chopping block because I'm the leader, I got to follow my gut. I can't do as much. Let me give you another example. Matt
Sure.
Millen is a dear friend of mine. If you saw his program on the NFL Network of Football Life, I was on that. Matt is a very dear friend of mine who I love. Matt failed in Detroit for a few reasons. Some of them he had no control over, but one of them is what made him a great teammate was he was a team guy. And there were multiple times in Detroit he didn't follow his gut because he went with the team wants this, I'm going to go with the team. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that guys can learn from Matt and Antonio is you dance with the one that brung you.
That's right.
Your gut got you there. Stick with it. And I think that is making a very that's a very long answer to a very succinct problem. And I apologize to you and to Greg, you and your listeners.
No, we've got more than enough time with you, and we appreciate that because that's all we're interested in is accurate content, the truth, and we're going to get that from you, especially with the Raiders. So, do you think that it also is that like one of those lessons that we see a lot in the NFL where or in college football where a coach gets fired, another coach comes in, and all of a sudden things are going really well. And then, hey, we think it's going to go really well again. So let's bring this guy in and give him the head coaching job. And then it doesn't. All of a sudden, well, what happened? Wait, what? Things were going go so well when you took over last year. And why didn't they look so good this year? Is that part of why it happens that way? Is that one of the reasons why it doesn't really work a lot when you hire someone in midseason and things go well? That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have success the next year?
Well, I think that's part of it. I've seen a lot of immediate hires that didn't work out, but I have seen a few that did. I think anytime you make a decision, my dad used to say to me, be careful about making decisions in your emotion because
Oh,
emotion is a
yeah.
deceiver. Emotion is a deceiver. And I think sometimes that can happen. Not always, but sometimes. And there was so much emotion wrapped up in that that I think if I learned anything and how I'm going to cover those situations in the future, I'm going to write, you step back for a minute. Here are all the examples where emotional things didn't work out in this situation. That doesn't mean this person isn't the guy,
Sure.
but step back and take a little bit of time. That's how I learned and how I'll
Okay.
cover it differently in the future.
All right.
And,
So
and I'm going
let's
to tell you something, though. I'm going to tell you something, Greg. There were a lot of people halfway through the season last year, three-quarters of the way through the season last year in that building who were stunned how it went. They were stunned and angry because they felt like, man, this isn't what we had signed up for. And I'm not saying mad at any individual. They were just mad at the entire situation.
Yeah, it did seem like there was something completely off, and I'm not surprised that you had optimism last year because there was reason for optimism after the way things ended the season before, and that's the NFL. That's what's
Can
so
I add one other point? Can I add a
sure.
point? Do you mind? I know it's your show. I'm not trying to
Oh no,
disrespect you,
like I said, we have all
but
the time in the world.
I'm going to tell you one thing. So you can go back and look, and I don't remember what the date was. It was August something. I put a tweet out, and on the tweet, I said, tonight is going to be a very big night for this season for the Raiders. I'm not going to get into what it is right now. I will after the year, but please bookmark this tweet.
Okay.
And that night, there had been a lot of problems with Devontae Adams. And uh, Antonio Pierce had made the comment everybody is going to play in the preseason if they're healthy. And Devontae Adams said, I don't want to play in the preseason. And he ended up not playing. And I had been told by several people if AP doesn't make him play, I'm going to be angry. And there were a lot of players in that preseason game who played a lot of minutes that they normally wouldn't play for that game of the year because they wanted to send a statement. And you cannot, the best teams handles their business.
Yeah.
And that was just one of many red flags of what it was going into the season. That discipline
Absolutely.
had disappeared. And, when you saw, Devontae Adams on social media, why the rest of the team was working at an OTA. And I'm not in any way putting this all on Devontae Adams because that would be untruthful. He certainly contributed, but people allowed him to do that.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
They're
Yes,
the ones you blame, not
that's
not
right.
him. So there was just that discipline was gone, and early on you knew. I remember walking out of Allegiant Stadium that night with Ezekiel Trezevant, who's my co-beat writer, and we were talking about this. And I just said, "Oh my God, I've just made a lot of predictions on this team, and I'm not going to look really smart." And you just knew right then the air was coming out of the football.
Yeah, and it's great that you're able to point that out because a lot of times, especially when you're not following the team, like most of our lads readers, unless you're a Raiders fan, you don't know these things. And so that's why it's great to follow insiders like yourself and people who cover the team on a full-time basis because you're able to find these things out and talk about it. And that's why it's a hard gig, but you do a great job, and we don't always get it right. So I didn't bring it up in any way, shape, or form to.
I'm glad you did.
But
I'm glad you did.
But
I don't run from anything. Anything I say, I've made 5 predictions on this team because this is my 6th year covering them. 2 of them were bad. The other 3 were either exactly what I predicted or within one game.
So you're
And you're
ahead.
never going to get it right. And I'll tell you what, in baseball, that's hitting 600.
Yeah, right.
And so one of the things that always makes me laugh is media people who don't want to be held accountable for what they
I
say.
know. Yeah.
Some guy in his mom's basement whose girlfriend's last name is .jpeg can make one hot take out of 100, and they go back and say, see, I called it.
Yep. I know
Well,
that
guess
feeling.
what? My name is on everything that I write. I write for the largest sports media company in the world, and my name's on everything. I own it. I don't go back and edit it. I don't go back and change it. If I'm right, please mention it. If I'm wrong, have me on and talk about it, because to me, the best at what we do as a writer, I can't demand accountability from athletes and then not be held accountable.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
this is what I love. And this is why and this, I do maybe 5% of the shows that ask me,
Yeah.
probably less. And when you first asked me, we passed it up the ladder and checked you out. And the reason I do your show is it isn't the hot take gotcha BS. You go on some shows, you said this, you suck. Well, okay, come on and ask me why.
Yeah.
Give me let me explain exactly why. I own that I said it. I own that I was wrong, but I don't mind it at all. And this is why you're a professional and why people do your show and why you have such a great audience, because they know it's not hot take crap with you. It's football. It's reality. It's real world. It's why you do a great job.
I appreciate that, Hondo. Yeah, and the same thing goes to my responsibilities because we're not going to be able to dig out the most accurate and truthful content for listeners unless we actually dive in and find out, well, what was the problem? What happened? If we just glossed over that, well, then what exactly did we didn't do a service to our listeners. So that's what I want to make sure that we do again. Obviously, this time around, it's a brand new off season. Free agency is halfway over with. It's hot and heavy for those first couple of weeks, and then it kind of cools down. There's still, of course, some moves that need to be made. But what do you think about so far what the Raiders have done, starting with the big move to acquire Geno Smith?
Hey, one of the things I love about doing your show is you have always made it clear to me, I want quality content. We're not up against a 30-second soundbite. So I'm going to answer your question with all due respect, but I want to address something you didn't bring up that I think is bigger than Geno. And let me tell you, I think Geno is huge. And that is the hiring of a John Spytek, who I've known for 20 years. I covered him when he was an intern with the Lions, and they all called him the whiz kid because of how thorough and detailed he was as an intern. And then you go get Chip Kelly, who said the most important thing anyone in the Raider organization has said this entire offseason. When asked about his offense, he said, "It is my job to make my scheme fit my players, not my players fit my scheme, and hide what they don't do well." Too many coaches are completely arrogant. Now, let me give you an example. I really like Josh McDaniels, the human being. I've known him a long time. I knew him when he was a graduate assistant at Michigan State, and I was a beat writer covering Michigan State. And Josh McDaniels is a tremendously good person, and I respect him. He is an offensive savant and a terrible head coach. Okay. And as good as he was as an offensive mind, and he's considered among the NFL's best, that's them saying it, not me. He was so rigid with his system that it failed when he didn't have the players that fit his system and he wouldn't change. You saw that with John Gruden, and you saw it with Luke Getsy last year. In comes a football savant who understands the game like a Chip Kelly, but who understands my system is about the players I have. Give me the players, I'll make the meal. Not let's try to make the meal without the groceries. I had an NFL GM describe Chip Kelly to me in a wonderful way. He said, imagine some guy sitting down who's a gourmet French chef, and you take him into a American restaurant and say, make me a gourmet French meal, and he tries, it's going to be terrible because he doesn't have any of the ingredients for the French food. Or take him to a Chinese restaurant is actually what he said.
Sure.
He goes, but a great cook can go to a Chinese restaurant
Yeah.
and make a great meal and
That's
a
right.
French restaurant.
Yeah.
So that's Chip Kelly. And then when you add a great quarterback coach in Greg Olson, who is a great quarterback coach, not a good one, he's a great one. But then in the mix, you put a Pete Carroll. Now, here is what Pete Carroll brings to the table. Then I'm going to get to Geno. He already knows he's a Hall of Famer. He already knows he's an elite coach. Zero ego. So he comes in with a first-time GM who really wasn't a first time. He did a lot of the GM duties in Tampa Bay. John Spytek doesn't get the credit he deserves. And no ego. No, I'm the Hall of Fame coach. You're the first year guy. Sit down. Hey, John, let's work together, buddy. Let's make this work for both of us. I think he took John Spytek a little bit off guard. And John Spytek is that guy. John Spytek is a no ego guy. And then, so now you got a guy running your team in Pete Carroll who can have a strong willed guy like a Chip Kelly, who can work with a John Spytek, and everybody works because of the dynamic. I think the biggest thing the Raiders have done is change culture. Now, getting to Geno, he has been a star with Pete Carroll. Pete's like a second father to him. And Pete knows how to use him. Pete knows how to put him in a position to succeed. You saw where that wasn't the case last year after Pete left in Seattle. And they still wanted to keep him. He still wasn't bad, but he has shined. I think for the first time since I've covered this team in 6 years, they have some stability at quarterback.
Ugh.
Now, for the first person to say he's taken a shot at Derek Carr, no, I'm not. Genius. Derek Carr is a friend of mine. But Derek Carr had become so toxic, not because he's a bad guy, but Raider Nation had been completely divided with the people who absolutely hated his guts
Wow.
and the people who actually worshiped him, that there was no middle ground. So whatever Derek did, it just completely, even in the building, by the way, in the building, there were people in the building that just couldn't stand Derek, and people in the building that thought Derek was the second coming of Jesus Christ.
And was there any particular reason for that? Was he a polarizing personality or?
Well, I think times are different now in America, but he was never ashamed of his devout Christian conservatism.
Yep.
I think there was a large group of people that didn't care about that part. They
Mm-hmm.
just didn't like the fact he fumbled and threw a lot of interceptions.
Okay.
I think that was a very
Sure.
germane criticism.
Yeah.
I think there were many reasons, but those were the two biggest.
Okay.
Why? I don't think anybody in the building cared about his Christian conservatism. That was not the reason.
Okay.
But the complaints you would hear is the fumbles, holding on to the ball too long, the interceptions. You heard the Christian conservatism outside of it. So, but my point was, is there were reasons, and so
Okay.
for the first time since I've been here, there is some stability. Nobody thinks Geno's Tom Brady,
Sure.
but he is a former Pro Bowler who now brings stability. They're going to pick a quarterback in the draft, almost certainly, unless things just fall completely stupid.
Okay.
They will, but Geno now brings stability. There is a sigh of relief in Raider Nation that you have stability at the most important position.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to touch up on all the front office moves because obviously that is very important too. I wanted to dive right into personnel, but I'm glad we're doing this because we're getting a whole bigger um, look at the entire offseason for the Raiders, and it's been very, very fun to follow. I also then want to ask you who Mark Davis obviously has been the man in charge there for a while. Uh, who is making the decisions along with Mark right now?
Okay, that is a great point. It's why I like doing your show because you're a football mind. Okay, I do so many shows and it just like, oh my god. Um, I like one of the things I respect about you, Greg, is I don't have to educate you, and you do enough interviews, you know exactly what I'm talking about
Yeah.
there with hosts. Mark Davis is totally in charge.
Okay.
But what Mark Davis has done phenomenally, and you understand this, but the average listener does not. I'm a member of the Pro Football Writers Association. You don't get your credentials pulled by being critical of the franchise. And people always say, well, that beat writer has to be, he has to speak highly of the franchise or they're going to pull his credentials. No, they're not, morons. It doesn't work that way. That being said, Mark Davis has gone through a metamorphosis as an owner. And you got to go back a little bit. Loves his father, but Al did not do a good job of training Mark Davis on how to be an owner. You may like Jerry Jones, you may dislike Jerry Jones, but one thing you know about Jerry Jones, he has prepped Steven on how to run the Cowboys one day when he walks away from it. Now, maybe he's shown them what not to do in some cases, and maybe he's shown them what to do, but you can't deny he hasn't shown his son how to do it. With that said, Mark Davis never got any of that.
Hmm.
So, Mark Davis, in my opinion, and I have a tremendous relationship with him, was not a great owner when he took over because how could he be?
True.
My son, I have a 2-year-old son. My wife and I adopted our beautiful son, Dexter Ernest Wayne Carpenter. He doesn't know trigonometry because at 2, I don't have a right to expect him to. My other sons do. They know it well. I have one son who's tremendously intelligent, who trigonometry was a joke to him. It was so easy. It doesn't mean that Dexter's a fool. It means he's 2 and hasn't been trained yet. And so a lot of people, myself included, can point to mistakes that Mark Davis made as an owner, and they're fair, but they're not fair if you don't point it out. He was learning on the job. Mark Davis, since coming to Vegas, has done a tremendous job. And now, when I talk to NFL owners, and I'm going to be with all of them in a couple of weeks at the owners' meetings in West Palm, they all talk about how he was grown, how he has developed, how he has become now a voice of reason in the NFL, how he doesn't stand up and just kiss Roger Goodell's rear, but how he thinks. Mark Davis did something that very few billionaires can do. He's come out and admitted, to me included, I know now what I don't know. And I'm okay with that. I get it. My dad, coached the game. I didn't. My dad was a football guy. I'm not. I like it, but I'm not a football guy. And so he goes and he gets Tom Brady, the greatest player of all time, and a man that in every business venture he's had, he's succeeded, and says, listen, I need your help. I need you to come in here. I need you to advise me. You're going to make a lot of the decisions. I'm going to still be there. You're still going to have to explain to me. I'll give you one. Tom Brady was very interested in Mike Vrabel. Mark Davis said, no, we're not going back the Patriot route again with Raider fan base hates the Patriots. We're not going there. So he isn't a rubber stamp, but Tom Brady has his ear. Tom Brady is the one he's listening to.
Okay.
And if I had to guess, and this is only a guess, I would say 90% of what Tom Brady wants, Tom Brady's going to get. Because Mark Davis is smart enough to understand, I don't know. But he's also smart enough to say, explain to me why this is the right decision. And he's smart enough to understand it. Mark Davis is the real story of the Raiders, his metamorphosis, his growth, and why I believe they're laying a foundation for success. Under Al Davis, this franchise had to move everywhere. They were always in lawsuits. That's not the case anymore. The Raiders are one of the wealthiest franchises in the NFL. They are rolling in money. They can give any signing bonus, any check, pay any amount. Mark Davis has paid over $100 million when it's all said and done in coaches that he fired because he didn't think they were the answer. That's not a guy who doesn't care, and it doesn't phase him. This franchise, and I'm not a fan, I cover them, has the best workout facilities and headquarters in the NFL, the best stadium in the NFL, and it's not close, and loaded with cash. Now they've brought in foundational pieces to get them going in the right direction. If you're a Raider fan, this is a good time to be a Raider fan.
Yeah, and you kind of could see that happening in Detroit as well. I remember talking with Jeff Risdon, who does a great job covering the team for the Detroit Lions podcast on YouTube, and just every year kind of seeing how it all began with just making sure it starts at the top with any business, making sure that you hire the right people to run the show, and that's what we saw the maturation there of a winning franchise in Detroit, and it certainly looks like this is a great start. Do any fans feel like, well, Pete Carroll is hired and it's a good hire, smart hire, gives us some stability, but how long will Pete be here? Mm-hmm. And what's life going to be like without Pete? Is there a succession plan, or do you think that that's not necessary right now?
So first of all, I can tell you, yes, there are a lot of fans that feel that way. There were a lot of fans that said, we're not getting Pete Carroll at 60. We're getting him at 73. Why are we doing this? But I'm going to give you a couple things. I'm going to give you some names. John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia, Josh McDaniels, Antonio Pierce, and the last but certainly not the least, Pete Carroll. The Raiders have had 5 coaches in the 6 years I've covered this team, and that's only with 5 seasons.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so I also tell people, okay, he is 73, but everyone will universally say it. He doesn't act 73.
Yeah.
And number 2 is, so he's got a 3-year deal. Pete Carroll is coaching and acting with the mentality for the long term. Pete Carroll will be the most surprised if he's only here 3 years. And so in a league that's not for long, how many coaches are actually there 10 years anyways?
Yeah.
So no, there is no succession plan. They're all in on Pete.
Okay.
They want Pete to be the guy. They want Pete to be the long-term answer, and he can be. And so, yeah, I understand why fans ask that question, sure, but that succession plan, none of that's even in play right now.
Okay. Let's dive into personnel more. We went through just about everything except free agency and how this is going to affect the draft. So start on offense. And offensively, besides the Smith trade, there weren't any blockbuster signings. Do you think any explain the Kappa signing? Is that just a depth signing? Do they see something in Kappa that the Bengals?
Yeah, I think he's a depth guy. I think that he is a guy that they think brings the intangibles. He's super smart. He's not going to be a detriment in the locker room. He brings some age so he can help a young offensive line maturity wise
Okay.
continue to grow. But if you need to play him, he's a quality player. So that was a decent signing.
Okay.
Um, but I want to go to the signing that you didn't mention on offense, Raheem Mostert.
Okay.
Now, Raheem was brilliant in 23, one of the best running backs. 24, he was injured, did not have a good year. Some believe he's down the downward spiral of his career. Some believe he's responded. He's back to healthy and going to be good. But this goes back to management. And this is where I think you and your listeners will appreciate the information I'm about to bring. The Raiders now are sitting here at 6, and there's no clear need. They don't have to take a quarterback. They don't have to go take a running back. If you remember the last half of 23, Zamir White was the best running back in the
Yep.
NFL,
Yep.
who struggled last year because Luke Getsy tried to make him run a scheme that he's not gifted for.
Okay.
I'll give you a great example. I have a beautiful F-150 Super Cab, and my wife drives a loaded out Tahoe, and both are great vehicles. But if I needed a transmission in my F-150, I couldn't go buy a Tahoe.
No.
Even though they're both great vehicles, it doesn't work. And you see this a lot of times where I talked about earlier in our program about putting guys in positions that don't work. So you got Zamir. Sincere McCormick looked really good last year before an injury. You've got a Raheem Mostert, is a guy now that you bring in that even if he's not who he was in 23, you now have 3 very capable running backs.
Okay.
And so what now the Raiders are sitting here at 6, and their philosophy, and it's been this way now for a couple of drafts, is BPA, best player available.
Okay.
That's why they didn't trade out last year when they had a chance to get Brock Bowers. You're going to see them now sitting here at 6, and there's any number of players they can take. I believe, ideally, depending on how the draft falls, that the Raiders would like to trade out of 6. I think they would like to hold it until draft night,
Okay.
unless somebody makes them a stupid offer. I think they would like to hold it until draft night because I think there's a couple players that they're eyeing. But if it works out, nobody knows now what the Raiders are going to do. So now there's going to be a lot of interest to trade up to 6 to get their pick if you think there's a chance they could take your guy. And I think that is really smart. They filled the needs good enough that nothing is glaring.
Okay. So then looking offensively, because again, it wasn't like they had a lot of earth shattering moves from an outsider's perspective. I would look at the depth chart here and say, well, looks like they could probably use a little bit more depth at wide receiver, especially someone that can come in and maybe even eventually be a number one.
Okay, well,
Do you,
I'm gonna post you up a little bit respectfully. Tell me why you think Jacoby isn't, because
well,
he's played like it. He's played
absolutely.
like it,
And you talked about that
and
last year. Yes.
he has
And he
not
played
dropped
real,
any.
and he had 1,000 yard season. Yes. Yep.
But go back and look at he was the number 1 rated wide receiver with not dropping passes.
Sure.
Jacoby is a 1. Now they need another receiver. I don't argue that point at all. But Jacoby gets overlooked because he's one of the few wide receivers who's not a diva. He's one of the few guys that isn't a look at me. Jacoby Myers was the best wide receiver on this team with Devontae on it. And I said it and I reported
Yeah.
it.
Talked about it. Yeah.
And to the point where, without naming any names, you can probably figure out who. I had people in that locker room mad at me. One in particular, for who one time I was say, "Well, go talk to your boy Jacoby." Well, he's not my boy. He's a tremendous football player I cover. They need a wide receiver. They do. And I know they've looked at trade. I know if they're not able to do a trade, they will draft one. But a lot of people overlooking Jacoby Myers, and they do that at their own detriment. He is a great person and a great wide receiver. And the Raiders, they don't like him. They love him. He is a good football player.
So what type of wide receiver do you think they need?
I think Tet would be a great one. But here's the problem with Tet. Now, I have some track record of credibility here. When I was covering the Lions, they picked Calvin Johnson.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I remember saying at the time, he's a dude. He's a can't miss NFL prospect. But a wide receiver touches the ball at most 15 times a game.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way, and I've had multiple successful NFL general managers, guys who've been in organizations that have won Super Bowls, tell me. One guy in particular said to me, who is universally considered by everyone in your audience one of the greatest football minds of all time. He said, I wouldn't touch a wide receiver in the first round unless I was a wide receiver away from a Super Bowl, because you can get really good ones later and cheaper. Tet is not a good wide receiver. He's great.
Mm-hmm.
Many people believe, myself included, that you can make an argument he's the best wide receiver, but he's only going to impact 15 plays a game. Calvin Johnson, in my opinion, if not the greatest, is a top 3 wide receiver in the National Football League history. I have him at 3. Great player. And I said to him, I hope you understand my criticism of them picking you was not anything to do with you personally, your talent, your character. It's because I think this franchise is so far away that you don't get them to the next level of Super Bowl when you can go pick an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman that plays 65 plays a game.
Sure.
And even a running back's going to be part of 40 or 45. And he totally understood that. It was not a disrespect of Calvin.
Absolutely.
It was an understanding of how to draft. If I think Tet has a chance of being a generational talent. But if they pick him, I'm going to be extremely critical because they're not a wide receiver away. It has nothing to do with his character.
Sure.
So anyways, I think you go pick up a wide receiver in the 3rd round. 4th is where I would look, because I think there's a bunch of wide receivers in the 4th round that are going to be really good players that are big bodied and have speed. But that's what they're looking for. They need a big body with speed. And Jacoby is a phenomenal possession receiver. You've got a great receiver in Trey Tucker who has speed to kill, and some other options. But they need a big body with speed. And I want to make this clear to your listeners. Everything about Tet is great character, great player, great guy. But unless you are a wide receiver away, I am never a fan of picking a wide receiver in the 1st round.
Well, I agree with you. I think it's all about the trenches up first myself after a quarterback, but even sometimes you have to start up front to protect the quarterback. So let's talk about the defense then, and maybe where the Raiders will be concentrating potentially with their top pick. I must say I got a kick out of a lot of the Max Crosby rumors over the past couple of months. Like trying to explain to people, well, you have no idea about Raider culture and exactly what Max Crosby even means to that organization and fan base when his name was being thrown around in trade talks. But anyway, it does look like they need more help as far as the pass rusher. There are some potential pass rushers that are going to be available potentially at that spot. Even though it's 6, I'm not even sure that's a good spot. Like you were saying, to trade down, that makes a lot of sense if they're going to look for a pass rusher in the 1st round, because I'm not sure the 6 is a good spot for one. But there are a couple of defensive tackles like Graham, who might be a perfect fit up there. We know Wilkins had a great start till his injury. So do you think that's where the Raiders might concentrate early on the draft? Would be up front, maybe in that front 7?
Well, I can tell you this: if Abdul Carter some way drops to 6, he's going to be a Raider. But before anyone laughs, the Raiders did thousands of mock drafts last year, and Dave Ziegler, the GM, personally told me this. He may have said hundreds, but I think he said thousands. They never one time had Brock Bowers
Yeah, I know, right?
dropping to 13.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear. I don't think in any sanity of this world does Abdul drop to 6. If he does, he's a Raider. That's
Yeah.
why I said wait. I think there's a really good chance Mason Graham could be picked, and I think that's a fine pick at 6. I have no problem with Mason Graham there. And talking to all the NFL general managers, there's a lot of love in this league for Mason Graham. Other than that, then I think you do drop back. You don't take another. I would not take a defensive line player at 6 other than Graham or other than Carter. Um, but when you look at that, they understand. So Malcolm Kuntz in 2023, the second half of the year, when Antonio Pierce turned Patrick Graham loose, the defensive coordinator, Malcolm Kuntz was one of the best pass rushers in all the NFL. Coming into 2024, all offseason, he looked to be even better. And then he sustained an injury right after camp before the season, missed the entire year. There were a lot of teams willing to pay him a lot of money, but he took a 1-year prove it deal to show the Raiders he was healthy because he wants to be there. You've got him and Max Crosby as bookends. You got Christian Wilkins, an all pro tackle, and Adam Butler, who was the biggest offseason defensive signing that nobody's talking about. This man is a game changer. He is the best defensive tackle in the NFL for gap integrity. He stays in his gap. He's widely respected. If you go back and look, I don't remember which Super Bowl it is, so forgive me, but the New England Patriots won a Super Bowl one year because of him, because of how well he played on the defensive line. He was a superstar last year. The Raiders signed him to a 3-year deal. He's your other starter. They're going to get to the quarterback if they stay healthy. They've got some young guns in that lineup as well. But if they can add an Abdul, they're going to add him for sure if he's at
Okay.
6. But if he's not there, depending on how it goes, I would not be shocked if they took a Mason Graham. I'm not predicting they would because I
Okay.
think there's a couple other people that they would consider
Okay.
before Mason. But I wouldn't be shocked. But again, if I had to predict today what the Raiders are going to do, I think they'll try to trade out of 6 unless somebody won't pay them what it's worth. But that defensive line is stout, needs depth, and it's young, but it's stout. And that's a good defensive line. Now you come into the corners. Jack Jones has played really well at times, and he's played terribly at times. There are times he looks like an absolute all pro. So let me give you an example. In 2023, he looked like an all pro. In 2024, that lack of discipline hurt no player more than Jack Jones that I mentioned earlier about
Okay.
what happened in 2024 with the Raiders. He took a step back. Now, I'm going to tell you, he's a grown man, so that's his fault. But I think the lack of discipline in the organization really hurt Jack. He's a guy that the Patriots let go, let's just say for lack of discipline. But I like him a lot. He's a good kid. He's not a bad kid. Has he made some bad decisions? Yes. Has he done some things he shouldn't have done? But you and I both are old enough, Greg, that people can make a bad decision and not
Oh
always does
yeah.
it make a person. That's a guy with all the talent that I think he's going to do very well with the structure that Pete Carroll is going to bring. I know that he's going to do well under Patrick Graham. Then you've got Jacorian Bennett, who was lights out last year prior to his injury. He was phenomenal. He's going to be good. You know, they get an Eric Stokes, who his rookie year in Green Bay looks like an all pro, but has gone backwards due to injury since then. Does he rebound? I don't know. He's a question mark. He's a wait and see gap
Mm-hmm.
filler. Could be great. I think the Raiders could absolutely go corner, but Will Johnson is a guy that comes with some question marks. The best ability is availability. When he is on the field, you look
Oh,
at Johnson, the Michigan corner, he's the best corner in college football when he's on the field. But the problem is he spends too much time off of it. Look at Nate Hobbs. Nate Hobbs was the best nickel corner in the NFL the last couple of years. So why did the Raiders let him leave? Because he was constantly injured. Not a wimp, a
Okay.
wonderful guy, a friend of mine, but they weren't going to pay him the money he got because he's injured too much. And so when you look at the situation of where the Raiders are at, I think they absolutely are. I'll give you another name. The Raiders love Jalen Walker now. And let me tell you, there are a lot of teams that love Jalen Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia, but they're looking for playmakers and they're going to take BPA whenever they pick. And so, yeah, I think the
Okay.
defensive line for the first string is very good, but they could use some more studs. And you add an Abdul Carter,
Oh yeah. I mean, that would
you
be
you, you add a Mason Graham.
sure.
My gosh,
Now you go from good to potentially great. So that's what you're
you
looking to do.
you go from good to potentially Eagles.
Sure, absolutely, and that could still happen. I'm a big fan, and I think a lot of people are of Malachi Starks. And there seems to be, again, on paper, a need to add another safety to that
Mhm.
room, a starter. Would Starks be a consideration in the first round?
Yes, if you're an NFL football team and you need a safety and you're not considering Starks in the first round, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy does everything right. On top of it, you want to hear a great story about him? His freshman year, you're going to love this story. I heard this from somebody in the program. His freshman year after practice, he's out there helping pick up blocking pads. And they're like, "What are you doing? You got to get in, shower, and eat, and get to meetings." He goes, "Yeah, well, some of these pads I used them." Okay, well, we got GAs for that. Let's go. He's like, "Yeah, but I helped make the mess." That's character.
Yeah.
And that's a guy that was raised right. Don't know his family, never met him I mean, that's not true. I've met him, but I don't know him. But that's character. And that's Malachi Starks, the consummate team guy. If you're looking for a safety, any team that walks out of this draft with Malachi,
Oh yeah.
as long as you picked him in the right spot, you hit a home run.
And before we drop on the defense, the other two guys we didn't talk about, Roberts and Chin, especially Chin. Here's a kid that gets off to a great start in his NFL career. Then all of a sudden, it seemed like the Panthers at the time that they didn't know what to do with him, and they were bouncing back and forth and what position and what scheme. And he leaves finally last year and seems to redevelop himself with Washington. So, what do the Raiders like in him, and what do they want to do with him with this defense?
They like him. He brings versatility. And the Raiders are, remember now, they're going to, Patrick Graham's always been this way, but they're going to adapt their scheme to fit him. He was a great addition. Losing Trayvon Merrick hurt. Great player. But if you'd have told me before free agency that you can have Merrick or Chin, and here's the cost of Merrick, here's
Oh
the
yeah,
cost of Chin,
yeah.
I'm taking Chin every day of the week. That was a great, great signing. He's going to bring a lot of versatility. Then you go to a Landon Roberts. The the biggest mistake of the Raiders this offseason was not signing Robert Spillane. They wanted him back. There was a lot of people in that building, and I believe they're going to regret it. But Landon Roberts was going to start for the Steelers in 2025. He started it last year. I know that because people in the franchise told me that. And great middle linebacker, a physically intimidating person, a bully on the field, the guy everybody wants their daughter to marry off the field, a great locker room guy, a great person. And Elandon Roberts comes in and they got him for next to nothing. And the only reason the Steelers let him go is because they had four middle linebackers because they address drafting as best player available. So they had a bunch of them. So they were able to let him go and play some guys younger who don't cost as much. Getting Elandon Roberts was a great balm to the wound of losing Robert Spillane. Great guy, great player. I think he steps in and plays I think he has a lights out year for the Raiders.
Why do you think they didn't resign Spillane?
I think that there are a couple of things, and I don't blame John Spytek for this. The best NFL teams sign their guys early, and I mean, re-sign their guys early so you don't
Yep.
pay as much.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example. There's been so much instability in the organization. You went, look at all the general managers they've been through in the last 3 years. You have Dave Ziegler, Champ Kelly, Tom Telesco, John Spytek. 3 years, four general managers. Four.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Okay. Now follow me for a moment here. So in comes John Spytek. Okay, yeah, I like Robert Spillane. Wow, he got a lot of money. All right, we're going to let him go. Now, I know that Dave Ziegler's intention, had he not been fired, was that going into 23, he wanted to re sign Spillane and wanted to re sign Max Crosby. Now, the Raiders end up paying Max 35 mil. It becomes the highest paid non quarterback. And by the way, he's worth every dime of it. But now look at all the teams, the Bengals, and look at all of their situation with Jamar. Now they're going to have to pay Trey Hendrickson more. You look at the Texans, just had to pay. His name eludes me, and because I'm an idiot, but just had to pay somebody. Dallas is going to have to pay Micah, and all of a sudden now you're sitting here, and before you go into camp, there's going to be 6 to 8 guys making more than Max Crosby, but they could have re-signed him last year for 30 million.
Sure.
And the best teams do that.
Mm-hmm.
Spytek inherited a team that had so much instability.
Okay.
There never was anybody able to think in the future. He's going to now. Roberts, if Spytek had been here last year, Spillane would still be here. That's
Okay.
the one.
And what do they need? So specifically, what did Spillane do the best that the Raiders need to? How are they going to replace that? Say in the draft, if they try to do that in the draft.
Well, I think they're very high on Landon Roberts, but they're also very high on Tommy freaking Eichenberg, a
Okay.
kid they got out of Ohio State, a tremendous middle linebacker. Had some injury issues last year, but tremendous middle linebacker. This guy's a stud. He's an absolute thumper. I think they really think a year under Landon Roberts can help him,
Okay.
get him some more reps. And then even if you re-sign a Landon, you still got him there. But you look at a Jalen Walker, they would have no issue. I mean, they lost Divine Diablo. And so I mean they had the issue with Divine Diablo. But when you look at adding a Jalen Walker now, you're talking pure stud there. And I think he is he's a real possibility for the Raiders.
Okay. Yeah, you've mentioned his name several times, so it sounds like he's somebody to definitely keep an eye on. And there's a lot of talk that he's like one of the more tough draft picks to try to zero in on exactly where he's going. Because some people believe he's as good as a top 15 pick, and other people believe he's a second round kid. So that's going to be the one to follow for sure.
Can I say this to you? I don't know, and this is my job, so I talk to NFL executives and scouts all the time, and a lot of them. I don't know one who thinks Jalen Walker is a second rounder, and so anybody that thinks that, I'm going to put their opinion a little bit less.
Yeah, sure.
People that get paid now, but I also want to tell you this: among the people that I listen to, and I listen to the proven ones, the people I listen to, at no time in NFL history do they believe there's been more bad drafting teams than there is right now. The fact that Brock Bowers dropped to 13th should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of drafting in the NFL.
Yeah.
I have heard people say because there's so much bad drafting, Jalen may slip to the second round, but it's not because he's a talent. I don't know anyone that doesn't have. I don't know when it comes to Jalen Walker. I don't know one NFL person that has him out of their top 15.
Yeah.
Now let me give you one more little bit of information here. Every single NFL person I talk to, and I talk to a lot. I'm going to dinner tomorrow night with a general manager. Me and my wife are with one of our dear friends and his wife. Every NFL person I speak to says there is one clear-cut best quarterback in this draft, and it's Cam Ward. But he's not a dude. He still has some question marks.
Mm-hmm.
The only other guy that universally, meaning over 50% think has a first round grade is Jackson Dart. I know some who give a Shador a first round grade, but most don't. There are some. And I had an NFL general manager, and I have to be careful how I describe his credentials to you because I don't want to give away who he is. But let's just say he has picked multiple successful quarterbacks who many people would consider a quarterback savant. Say to me, as many as 6 quarterbacks could go in the first round this year. And I've only got 1.5 with first round grades.
Yeah.
There are so many people picking poorly now. And that is what's making this NFL draft. So at the most important position, quarterback, it may be the worst class since 2022.
Yep.
But like I had one of them say to me, I asked all of the NFL scouts this a few weeks ago because the Raiders really liked and wanted to trade for JJ McCarthy. I said, where would JJ McCarthy be in this draft? I sent it out to a ton of NFL people. Every one of them said number 1 QB in this class. Not even close. Number 1 quarterback in this class. I said, even over Cam Ward, and multiple.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, having said that, Jalen Milroe has all of the physical attributes, and look at what he just did at his pro day, 4.3. But there are a lot of question marks with him. He's got to be developed. But I think there's a chance somebody takes him in the first round. I
Could
think Quinn
happen.
Ewers. I think Quinn Ewers is probably going to go in the first round. And then there's a couple others that maybe, and not because they should. And so what happens is there's so much bad drafting teams. Last year, a general manager and I, matter of fact, the one I'm going to dinner with tomorrow night, we were joking back and forth, texting. You'll appreciate this and think this is funny. Every single time a team made a bad pick, he put Merry Christmas to us.
Yeah, right.
And every time they make a dumb pick, there's teams at the bottom are just salivating because they know they're going to get someone. Think about this. Brock Bowers, the Raiders had 3 dudes last year, can't miss guys. Joe Alt, Brock Bowers, Talise Fuaga. They wanted to get out of that draft with one of those 3. And universally in the NFL, those 3 were considered the 3 can't misses. There were other guys that were considered really good players who could become great, but you can't be a dude if there's any question marks.
Yeah.
And so to get him at 13, to pay him 13 money, let me tell you, he'll get his deal redone early and they'll pay him early. But that is the consensus in the NFL, Greg, is there's so many bad drafting teams.
Sure.
Again, Jalen Walker, top 15 player, who if he slips to the second round is going to be because Christmas came early for some team.
Well, honestly, Carter should be talent-wise the first pick in the draft. He should be. Yep. But Tennessee, whether they go ahead and whether it's pressure because they have to take a quarterback or whatever the case may be, it's kind of looking that way. It looks like Ward is probably going to go first or second, but yeah, that would be something if Carter actually made it that far. I don't think that is going to happen.
No.
But like you said, you never know. The draft is funny. All right. So I've taken more than enough of your time, Hondo, and I really appreciate it as always.
Wow. I didn't realize it's been an hour.
Yes, it has been. But obviously we could do this for longer than this, but I know you're real busy. And I guess the last thing I'm going to ask you is give me a prediction. Can you give me one? A draft prediction?
You mean in a draft?
Number 6.
I would say, based upon what I'm hearing is going to happen, I think the Raiders will trade out.
Okay.
But like last year, if a couple of
somebody
guys
falls,
fall,
yeah.
they
Is
will. But
Carter the
if
only
I had,
one that
if I
is he
no,
the only player if he falls? If who else could
no,
fall to them that they would take?
I'm going to say
Graham.
this to you. Well, I'm just going to say this to you. As a beat writer, I I will never not report truth. I won't lie. But if there are things I learn and I have to keep quiet in order to have information,
Okay.
it would be unfair for the Raiders if
That's
I were
quite
to
all
give
right.
another name.
That's fine.
Yeah, it would be
Hondo?
unfair.
No, I got
I
it.
will tell you though, I think there is another guy that they would take other than Abdul, and maybe even two.
Okay.
So, but and now if they can't trade, they can't trade. They would have
Sure.
to take somebody.
Yeah.
But I think if I had to put a percentage, I think the Raiders will trade.
All right, Hondo. Great job as always. I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to talking to you before the 2025 season begins. I can't wait for that conversation because that means the 2025 season is going to be beginning again real soon. But we still have the
I
draft.
can, I can. I need a vacation after this
I hear
draft.
you. I hear you. All right, Hondo. Appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.